Right, I'll get started with some introductions. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Managing for Success webinar on operating cycles with Sarah Charlton from DG Legal. For those of you who haven't joined our webinars before, my name's Lucy, and I'm a consultant at DG Legal. I'll just go through a few bits of housekeeping before we begin. So the slides from today's presentation will be sent over tomorrow, and a recording of the webinar will be available. So if we do run over a little bit and you do need to leave, you'll be able to watch the rest at another time. We are in webinar mode, so we can't see or hear any of you. So please do use the chat function so that Sarah can answer any questions you might have as the webinar goes along. I'm going to preemptively apologise if I freeze or I've been having a few technical difficulties, but I'm sure Sarah will be able to take you on going forward, and I'll pop back on as soon as I can if it does happen. And finally, to introduce Sarah, Sarah has a BSc in Applied Accounting and is a fellow member of the Association of Chartered and Certified Accountants. Her career spans over 35 years, working within the legal sector, fulfilling roles from COFA through to CEO. During her career, she has worked with a number of legal regulators, professional bodies, and government organisations. Sarah has been a member of the Institute of Legal Finance and Management throughout her career, qualifying as a fellow member in 2005. And Sarah has also served as chairperson between 2010 and 2012 and continues to serve as an executive council member. So without further ado, I'll pass you to Sarah. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I usually, when I do my intro, I usually start off with apologising in advance for any unplanned packages, any children that decide that they want to play next door. But the new one for my list is actually is an aeroplane going over. There is a local airport a little bit closer, and I decided that I was going to relocate from one of the bedrooms upstairs, and I thought it would be a good idea to relocate down in the dining room so I could have the doors open and enjoy the sunshine. So best laid plans and so forth. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session in the DG Legal series of free management training. So today's session is going to explore what an operating cycle is, what are the key stages, and how easily you can influence this. You'll be pleased to know that the training shouldn't last more than 20 to 25 minutes to ensure there is sufficient time at the end to ask questions. There'll also be an opportunity about 2/3 of the way through to ask questions. The benefit of being on a live session is to ask the questions. So please feel free to make Lucy work for her money today and ask as many questions as you possibly would like to. We're going to kick off with a poll. And this poll is just going to give me a little bit of an idea on where, how you're feeling today. And the second question is a little bit of a flavour on what your experience, what your knowledge sits for operating cycles, so we can have a look about some of the terminology. I don't want to start using debtors and creditors and things like that if they are likely to be unfamiliar terms to you. So please do take the time to answer the poll. So we will, a few of you there are quietly excited. Excellent. Hopefully you will learn something. I know one of the DG Legal clients, Sam, is on the call today, so I'm hoping that was her who's particularly excited because it's DG Legal training session, which is really, really good. So we've had 8 out of 18 of you participate so far, so that's we're getting over half. But we will give it a few minutes because these could be difficult questions depending on how your day has been. You might also be munching on a sandwich because it is lunchtime. So we've had 11 out of 18 answers so far. It is anonymous, so I genuinely can't see who's voted for what. So please don't feel like you will offend me in any shape or form. So we seem to be sticking at 11. So we'll just give another 60 seconds in case the other 7 or 8 people decide that they would like to have a view on this particular poll. We've just had somebody pop in now. I think we're pretty much there. So we're going to end the poll. and share the results with you. I am really, really pleased to see that everyone's either excited because they might learn something, or it's DG Legal training session. Can't say I'm surprised that there wasn't an audition for Gogglebox, but apologies for the aircraft. And as you'll see on question 2, I anticipated that there would be a number of people where this particular topic would be relatively new. So I am really, really glad that people have been honest, because it does allow me to pitch today's session at a level where the majority of people are. It's excellent. So we'll end that particular poll and have a look at kicking off. So why do I have a tortoise on a skateboard, you ask? Very good question. I feel it was important to set the scene. No doubt you've all heard of the saying, working smarter, not harder, but I thought it was quite apt in light of the topic that we're about to cover. And at a very high level, your operating cycle gives you an average period of time of how long it takes from a consumer instructing you to the cash being cleared in your bank. This is, in essence, a measurement of how efficient your business is. With more and more law firms wanting to create a more commercial environment, an operating cycle is a really good starting point to consider. So we're going to have a look at some of the easier categories, and that's not to say that you can't do this with the difficult ones. It's just a case of if you're starting off, and also for me to be able to apply the concept, it's just easier to look at things that have a shorter lifespan. So the lifespan we're talking about from when the client gives you those instructions and you're closing a letter, putting that away, and you've been paid. So I would generally recommend that you look at types of work that have a relatively short operating cycle. So if you work in private client, this is likely to be wills and LPAs. If you work in property, perhaps this might be a transfer of equity or a remortgage. If you work within employment, it could be a compromise agreement. If you do commercial work, it could be an occupational contract. In immigration, perhaps a straightforward Home Office application. Does that exist? I'm sure there'll be lots of lawyers on the session today who will be able to tell us whether that's utopia land or that is potentially possible. Now we have provided some context, let's have a look at one of the other reasons why you might be interested in looking at the cash. So whether you believe we're in a recession or we're not, what I can tell you, having experienced the last recession, the SRA did see a correlation between law firms struggling to raise cash and client money being misappropriated. They published a set of poor behaviours, some of which were things like an inner circle of people with influence. So they were running the business quite secretive, didn't share an awful lot, cash issues. Drawings exceeding profits, unbelievable that if you had a profitable business that you would draw more money than you're making money. How anyone would think that would end other than a closure would be a surprise to me. But nevertheless, they're indicators that they saw. Borrowings are greater than net assets, so you owe more money than you actually have in assets, and that's something called a liquidity ratio for the accountants or accounts managers that might be on the call today. But they also did publish what good might look like, and these were things like strong capital. So the business had a good amount of capital, both working capital as well as capital that the partners had left in the business. Strong cash collection, strong cash position. So they were really, really good at making sure that there was a constant throughput of cash through the business. And provisions. So when I talk about provisions from an accounting perspective, if you know that you have a potential PI claim and your excess is 10, 15, 50,000, 200,000, then good practice would be that you would advise your accountants if you're a small business and that's outsourced, or alternatively, if you have a fully functioning finance department, you would put provisions in for things that are likely to come up, or there's a probability. It's making sure that you forward plan and have some indicator as to what you might need to spend your reserves on in the coming months or years. and naturally drawing less than you're making money. So if you make 100,000, then you obviously draw less, 100,000 or less. You wouldn't draw 110,000 because you're eating away then into your capital. So this session is intended to help reverse what would be a poor indicator relating to cash issues, and ultimately shortening your operating cycle, which will naturally bring your cash into the business earlier. And as we all know, I love this saying, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king, cash is reality. You could be profitable. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have cash in the bank. One doesn't go with the other. It takes a little bit of hard work for them to correlate. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at each one of these sections individually, but at a high level, this is in essence the formula that we're going to use. And as you can see, you don't need to be a mathematician to use it. It is quite self-explanatory. It is quite straightforward. It's not something that's difficult to remember. So let's consider hypothetically, if it takes 100 days to complete the work, and this is often referred to as lockup, a term which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, and it takes 50 days for the clients to pay, and all of your creditors work on a 30-day payment term. So when I say creditors, people that you need to pay, so things like stationery, things like wages, things that like electricity, gas, all the stuff that you need to pay to run your business, insurance, professional indemnity insurance. So quite often, some of those you don't have to pay immediately. You might be able to, you might pay them quarterly if it's electricity or gas. So hypothetically, say for instance, your average is 30 days, then your piece, the operating life cycle for that piece of work is going to be 100 days plus your 50 minus your 30. So it does equal 120 days. So that's how you arrive at the number of days it takes in your operating cycle for a particular category of law. And with law firms, you can't do it on a blanket basis. You have to do it by department, and ideally you have to go down to that granular and actually look at the type of work in that department. An operating cycle life's going to change depending on the piece of work that you're doing. So if you're doing a probate piece of, a piece of probate work that's not grant only and it deals with winding up the estate, then your operating cycle is going to obviously be a lot longer. So various things can impact this cycle, from poor file management, poor billing, inefficient processes, and everything in between those categories. So what I've done to hopefully visualize it, provide a sort of visual context a little bit, I've broken them down into typical stages that I do tend to see that accumulate WIP. So most law firms pay for someone to respond to an inquiry. And whilst this isn't chargeable, it can influence the length of time it takes to bank the cash. So I have included it for consideration only. You should review how long it takes on average for a client to be converted from an inquiry to instructions. Making client service improvements here could increase your conversion rate. Increasing your conversion rate means that you're making more money. So it's a win-win. Once the client has instructed you, you would typically onboard them. And firms do this in an array of ways, from automated processes, onboarding teams, to the traditional solicitor and secretary sending out the letter. The fee earner completes the task, the client approves it, and then pays in due course. Once the payment clears the bank, that operating cycle comes to a conclusion. So we are going to have a look at each of these one by one, but I just wanted to check with Lucy, are there any questions so far as we're at the halfway point?
Not yet, Sarah.
Brilliant. So we're going to start off with looking at onboarding. I anticipate that many of you on this session today probably do have quite a good onboarding process, but I can't emphasize enough how this really does vary from law firm to law firm, where it can range from hours, days, weeks, months. So let's consider comparing two onboarding processes to demonstrate this point and demonstrate the variance in operating cycle. So Firm A provide the option for clients to follow one of two streams: digital onboarding, which consists of an electronic onboarding pack that guides them through confirming their identity. Documents are digitally signed, and it also provides a link to pay online or complete a bank transfer. Just have a quick drink. If they pay online, then this is likely to have taken firm A less than 1 hour to have onboarded them. Alternatively, the client can have all of this sent through the post or by email. However, firm B, on the other hand, have a different onboarding process again, and this is completed by the fee earner in charge of completing the work. Whilst they do use relatively standard letter templates, they are tweaked slightly for each client. They use electronic dictation instead of tapes. The fee earner has dictated for his secretary to send out to the client the onboarding letter and supporting documents. There is generally a 3-day window between dictation and letters going out, which I feel is particularly normal, average. Whilst the receptionist did capture the client's email address, the fee earner prefers to send hard copies through the post. We all have a fee earner who likes to do things their own specific way. To save money, the post goes out in the second-class mail, which can take 2 to 3 days. So the irony I see here when we talk about the whole operating cycle is how they've looked to try and save money potentially in the wrong place. That is likely to bring firm B to a 5 to 6 day process at this point. The client contacts the secretary to agree a time to drop in the signed terms and conditions, the check and proof of identity. So let's say it averages 3 days to do it. So the average onboarding days for firm B in this scenario is 8 working days. So already you can start to see the difference. Let's then have a look at the work. We're going to work on the basis that the piece of work that needs to be done is a standard husband and wife will, where they simply leave everything to each other and to their children if their spouse doesn't survive them. I've picked this merely because even if you don't work in a sort of general high street firm that does private client, you may well have actually completed a will yourself, so you are familiar with the process. And although I have chosen an easy one, ultimately you can choose anything. It is simply about breaking it down to the different steps to consider how you can do them more efficiently. And I hope that's what you're going to get when we start to compare firm A and B again. So firm A have taken initial instructions over the phone, so the draft wills are waiting for the clients when they arrive at their appointment at the office. All fee earners have laptops and are well trained on the practice management system. The clients discover a typo on one of the children's names, but other than that, the wills are good to go. So the fee earner is able to just jump on his laptop, make the small amendment, and then send the document straight to print due to the way that their tech setup is. From there, a member of the administration team proceeds to bind the wills as the fee earner is chatting nicely to the client. The clients sign the wills, and then a scanned copy of the executed will is sent by email to the clients prior to the will being put into the safe storage. The clients are provided with a receipted invoice and a closing letter. Receipted invoice because payment was in advance. Terms of the business is that they have to pay in full. So the operating cycle would actually end at this point. So say it takes 5 days to make the appointment and then 1 day to execute the will. So the total operating cycle of firm A is 6 working days. Firm B, on the other hand, writes to the client to make an appointment to take instructions. So I need to use visuals here. So that's 5 days. Client makes the appointment for 5 days' time. So that's another 5 days. During the first appointment, instructions are taken and the fee earner dictates the will, and it is sent out to the client in draft for approval. So we've already established 3 days dictating, 2 days in the post. So that's another 5 days. The client sends it back with a typo on one of the children's name. So it goes back into dictation for another 5 days. I'm struggling with my fingers now. And then the client makes another appointment for 5 days to execute the will. The client signs the will and the fee earner will send a copy out in the post together with the bill. And that's another 5 days. So that brings the operating cycle to 30 days so far. The firm accept cash, checks and bank payments. They don't have a debit terminal at all. The clients doesn't do online banking, so they send a check in through the post after a month, which is the invoice terms. So the total operating cycle of for firm B is 60 days compared to 6 days for firm A. Can you imagine how much money this could bring in early if you were to change how you completed this work? So for a medium-sized practice who might bill £5,000 a day for wills, which I don't think is unreasonable for a medium-sized firm, that's a staggering £300,000 that you would have been, that you're currently funding, that would be in your bank so much earlier. So it's less working capital that you'd have to fund. I don't want you to think for 1 minute that you can't make improvements and that that don't cost money or involve tech. I genuinely think efficiencies can be made in most law firms, no matter how they operate. And we know that law is very much a people person, type of business. You can often use what you already have to make inroads to reducing your operating cycle. So I'm going to throw in the mixture of firm C, and be prepared to have a poll at the end of this to consider your firm that you work for and which correlates most, firm A, B, and C. So firm C have a standard onboarding process in which the fee earner sends the information out because the fee earner is self-sufficient. The fee earner has phoned the clients. They want to come in and see the fee earner face-to-face because they don't want anyone else that they might know to witness execute their wills. But let's mix it up a bit. And instead of receiving initial instructions over the phone, because that would be too easy, let's mix it up and say that through the onboarding process, that they send a wills questionnaire out. A draft will is then emailed to the clients following receipt of the wills questionnaire. You hear back from the clients that same day, advising you of a typo. You resend the amended draft that same day. You advise them that you have a debit card machine in reception so they can pay for the will on the day they come in to execute their wills. They're advised to bring in their passport and proof of address for their appointment in 5 days' time. The clients sign the terms and conditions, provide their identity and pay at reception before they go in to see the fee earner. The admin team print and bind the executed will for the client and provide a photocopy of it together with a receipted bill, or they could email it. This brings the operating cycle for firm C to 6 days. What I wanted to show you is that you have to understand your business and how it works in order for you to be able to propose reasonable changes on how you could work differently. Every law firm is on a different journey and at different stages. What you can see here is that firm A and firm C achieve the same outcome, but simply travel down different paths to get there. Putting operational and cash needs to one side, if you were wanting to write a will, which firm do you think you would want to choose? Which firm is putting clients' experience and providing the best service? So we're just going to do one more poll, and you'd be pleased to know that that's the last poll for today. I want you to think about firm A, firm B, and firm C. So we've got firm A, quite tech orientated, firm B, very traditional, and then we've got firm C, which is a little bit of a hybrid of the two, just to give us a bit of a flavour for the type of law firm that you might feel that there's a greatest correlation with. So we've just got about another 10 people to vote, and then we will be close to being able to publish. Okay, so I shall end the poll now and share the results. I'm not surprised that it is firm C, because the fact that you're actually on this training session tells me that you're quite proactive and you are looking for constant improvement. So I think that firm C was largely what I was anticipating, and I am glad there wasn't many firm Bs on there, even though they'd moved from tapes to electronic dictation. So we're going to move over to client approval. A number of things can affect this, and this can be how accurate you're taking the instructions. So if you notice in these scenarios, I included a typo. So sometimes just trying to retrain people to make sure that they read back a spelling, something that they've actually made a note of. If you're sending questionnaires out, if you're able to link that up with your practice management system, it means that the client is populating the dossier fields for you. If you're the person that's taking the instructions is inexperienced, so they don't know the right questions, they don't know that if the client asks this, then you should ask this. So you're not getting everything that you need at the outset. Transposition errors and things like that can obviously all compound the accuracy of instructions right at the outset, and there's less chance then of you being able to have a shorter operating cycle. How you communicate with the clients. So, if you've sent something out, do you have automated reminders? Can the reminders be done by the admin team or by software? If you don't send a reminder out, then perhaps it's been lost, it's been mislaid, and you wouldn't know that. The client doesn't realize you've sent it. And whether they've paid or not will also depend on client approval. If you don't operate a process where they pay up front, sometimes clients think because they've had the advice or because they've had something in draft, that's what they want, and they won't continue the whole process to allow you to then bill it and send a closing letter. Or alternatively, they might have changed their mind and they should still pay for the services that you've provided. So client approval, they're typically some of the obstacles that you might face that lengthen the operating cycle. Raising of the bills, I have put it in here, but that is really very much a subject on its own. At the firm I'm involved in, we don't have any payment terms. The payment terms are very much zero. So if we did raise a bill and you hadn't paid it, we expect immediate payment. There isn't a 7 days, 14 days or 30 days. If you can use some standard bill templates rather than dictating or having to explain or include too much information that is unique to that client, anything that you can do that allows things to become generic, it's going to speed that process. So if a fee earner is just able to say, can you raise a bill on the LPA rather than dictate each one individually with the wording. And raising the bill as appropriately as you can. So on a property matter, for instance, making sure the bill's all lined up so that on completion, the bill is raised and sent to the accounts department. It doesn't happen a week later. If you're doing property work, you want to try and tie up the completion part of that process, if you can, all in one day. So the estate agents are paid, mortgages are redeemed, all the letters go out. So you're touching that file the least amount of times you possibly need to. And then for other categories of law, quite often if you've done the bulk of the work, then that would be the point that I would be looking to do the bill, because the full payment would be due regardless of whether there is a typo or an amendment later on. And making sure that the client has agreed the fees, knows exactly what they need to pay. All of those things can make inroads to reducing that. I just thought I'd include the average debtor day. So that's, how long people pay you. If you don't have money on account of costs and things like that, this is just the ratio. So you can go away and have a look. For instance, if you have debtors of 55,000 and your gross fees are 800,000, that formula is going to give you a debtor days of 25 days. So it gives you a flavour for how long it does actually take you to collect money. And again, that's a significant part of the operating cycle. Fee earners, at first glance, they can be misled to think that debts are actually outside their control. There are a few things that they could do, things like making sure that they have money on account of costs, a wonderful concept, as well as cost updates. There are some things that will be outside their reach, things like the firm's payment terms, billing process. If they don't have anyone that does credit control or debt recovery, if the terms and conditions are poorly written, not unenforceable, and also if you have an untouchable list, if a senior partner gives you some work and that client's precious and you can't collect that debt, my view is that unless they're good payers, then not good clients. This is just to sort of quickly cover off the creditors aspect of it. You should distinguish between creditors due by the business and creditors due by clients. So things that you need to pay. For me, you're going to have professional disbursements and expenses, things like court fees and so forth. I would distinguish them away from things like your telephone bill, your electricity, stationery, professional indemnity. So when you're working out on average what your creditors' terms are, so how long you have to pay, I would definitely look to separate the two if you possibly can. I feel like there's one question there, Lucy, waiting for you to open.
Yeah. So it was a little while ago, and it's David Hayes asks, I thought we had to get client ID at the outset.
So you do have to have it before you obviously take money and give them the advice. But I definitely feel that if you've taken their identity, or if it's a category of law like wills, for instance, doesn't actually sit within the money laundering, the scope of money laundering, it's just a best practice. I wouldn't want to be sort of accepting obviously £500,000 on a piece of work that relates to a category of law that sits within the AML regulations. But on a will, for me personally, I think that it was quite reasonable for you to take their identity and be satisfied, then take the payment, and then they go in to see the fee earner and have the legal advice. That would be my thought process.
Well, that's the only question we've got on the Q&A and the chat so far.
Excellent. Well, so you'll be pleased to know that that's the end of your, so hopefully if you hear the term operating cycle, you're going to know and understand the 3 stages, and you're going to be able to just be able to rattle off the formula. I'll be testing you, Lucy, at the next DG Legal meeting.
I'll have to do some revisions, I think.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for presenting today for us and answering the question. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. As a quick reminder, the slides and a recording of the webinar will be available tomorrow. And this afternoon, you should receive an email asking to rate us out of 5 stars. So if you have enjoyed today, please do leave some feedback, and any suggestions for future topics are more than welcome. That just leaves me to say that our series of webinars continues tomorrow, the 15th of June, and we will be presenting a webinar on key compliance issues for legal firms with David Gilmore and Sarah Charlton from DG Legal, Deborah Whitkiss from Insight Legal, and Michelle Garlick from Waitmans. Thank you very much again, Sarah, and have a good afternoon, everybody.